Hello, it's Townsend Fien, sitting in the IAB Europe office. Okay, we're gonna blast off, and hope that the people who dial in a bit late can watch the recording. So as I said, I wanted to start off with a few general observations about CMPs, this consent management provider role in the context of the transparency and consent framework. So of course the slides don't move. Hang on just a second, we have some slides. Voila. So interestingly, the consent, the one part of the transparency and consent framework that is not actually provided is indeed the user interface. And that's where we have created the space for and the opportunity for the role of the consent management provider. So the framework itself has these three other parts that are in dark blue on the box in front of you for everyone who's dialed in. It's got the global vendor list, which is that pool of vendors on whom publishers and other suppliers of other online services can draw. It has the technical standard or protocol, which is the standardized way of communicating about the vendors and the legal bases and the data processing purposes. And then there are the framework policies. So they're kind of the rules of the road. And those three boxes in dark blue are all things that are foreseen and prescribed in the transparency and consent framework. And then that user interface part is something that we felt was quite important to leave to publishers to own the look and feel, and to be sovereign in that relationship with their users, but obviously having to apply within that context a certain number of basic rules, so that signals coming from that interaction between the user and the website can be relied upon by everybody up and down the chain. So as I said, it's not strictly speaking part of the framework, but there are some key requirements that pertain to the role of the CMP, and we'll get into those in a tiny bit of detail below. A very important aspect of those requirements is the need for auditability. So under the GDPR, it's very important for data controllers to be able to show that they had they were operating legally, operating within the limits of the law, had legitimate access to some legal basis, whether that's consent or legitimate interest or contract. And so the auditability is a new and important part of the legal framework that will apply as from May. And the way we have set up the CMP concept requires that CMPs register and get an ID, so that we can fulfill this auditability requirement. CMPs will also be assigned a subdomain that will enable them to read and write global consent third-party cookies. And I will speak a little bit about tools that IAB Europe and the IAB Tech Lab are providing to support companies that want to be CMPs. Obviously, one doesn't need a third-party CMP. Publishers can be their own CMPs. As I said at the beginning, that was an important part of the way we set up the framework. Just done pretty hard now. Okay, so the CMP is kind of this connecting tissue between the user, the publisher, and then this global vendor list, that community of vendors to whom the publisher has access and whom the publisher can disclose information about to the user, on the basis of which the user will make choices. So the CMP has to connect to the GVL, to the global vendor list. This is the centralized and constantly updated dynamic list of vendors. And the global vendor list is also a really important source of information for publishers, because the publishers will rely on that vendor list as the basis for the disclosures that they need to make about the identity of the third parties that they are working with, their partners, the legal basis that those partners are using, and the data processing purposes that the purposes for which those partners need to process data. And then the user, of course, will have this range of choices on all of those different options. And as I said, there are these baseline principles that everybody is going to have to comply with. There are some really simple requirements so that we have the CMP registration. There is a portal that was set up about 10 days ago, that was launched about 10 days ago, which is there are actually two parts of it. There's the global vendor list sign up, and there is the CMP registration, CMP sign up. There are a few very minimum requirements for CMPs. This is the list right here. When you go to the CMP portal, you'll have an online form that will require the provision of these pieces of information. Obvious things like legal name, subdomain prefixes, other administrative details for billing and stuff. Indications about for whom the CMP service is to be offered, whether just for a single website, a set of websites that are connected together, or a commercial CMP. One will have to commit to agree to play by the agreed policies, terms and conditions, applicable law, and the framework policies, and agreement to pay a nominal administrative fee, which is 350 euros is the amount of that administrative fee. Whoops. So the registration process is at the web address you see on the screen. We can also make these available after the webinar. There's a very simple process pursuant to which the online form is filled out first. And then we actually have an administrator sitting in our office that checks that all the fields have been filled in correctly. There are a couple of pieces of information that need to be independently verified are verified. And then the administrator notifies the CMP applicant that everything's in order, and invites the CMP applicant to make the payment. Once the payment is received, the CMP is awarded an ID and subdomain, if that's relevant. Again, that would be for CMPs that intend to work for other publications than themselves. And we are updating a list of registered CMPs daily now, I guess. And after the first month, we probably won't do it daily, but we have about 20 CMPs who have registered since last week, the middle of last week, when we got the portal going. This is a list of policies, and this is probably more detail than we need to go into, but the policies are listed on the global sign up site. So that's something that anybody can consult. If you're thinking about signing up, you can go and check those out, and those will be subject to iteration going forward. There is a starter set of policies, but obviously the policies both for the global vendors and the CMPs will evolve a little bit as we get case law and enforcement of the general data protection regulation. And here's a list of tools we have that, as I said, we can send after the webinar. And there is the address for the CMP sign up. So maybe with that, I would hand over to our first CMP presenter, who is Jawad Stouli, CTO of Didomi, who's going to talk for 10 or 12 minutes and do the presentation of the Didomi CMP. So we're going to hand over the rights to Jawad and take it away. And obviously, anytime anyone wants, you may put a question to us. We'll have a big Q&A session at the end after the 3 presentations, but there's the chat option in the course of the presentations. Jawad, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I'm Jawad Stouli, so CTO of Didomi, a consent management provider located in France and in the US. We've been working with the IAB as part of the Tech Lab for a few months now to help specify and implement an easy way to share consent across the industry. So we're pretty excited to be here today and part of the initiative. I think the IAB Europe has done a great job in getting everyone to work together, which is always an achievement in and of itself in the ad tech industry. So that's really nice. So I'm going to do a quick demonstration of our consent management platform, and more precisely how we inform the user, how we collect and share consents, offer granular choices, and then what tools we provide around that to be compliant with what was mentioned previously, which is the auditability question in the GDPR. If you can see my screen, what I have here is like a test page that's publicly available. So I'm happy to share that with the group if you want to be to kind of like play with our CMP easily. And so what you can see, right away is that the most important part of the CMP offering, obviously, is the banner that's in the lower right corner here. And the goal of the banner is to find the right balance between user information and user experience. It's a pretty common standard these days in the EU. Maybe a little new to our American friends who haven't seen that many cookies banners yet, but for European users, it's become kind of like a standard. At least it sure has in France and close countries. So the idea is that we need the user to be able to make an informed choice as per the GDPR, but we don't want to be too annoying and kind of like hinder the user experience, because we can all see that there's going to be some fatigue related to those banners and pop-ups showing up everywhere all the time. So we need to strike the right balance there. And their thinking is that the existing solutions that work pretty well are also kind of like well established. So we basically offer a pretty standard banner from that perspective that's enhanced to be compliant with the IAB GDPR framework by sharing consent information in real time with vendors on the page. And so if you are a user that is okay with what we're giving in terms of purposes, information, and data processing information in the banner, you're free to just agree and close and kind of like go forward. What you can see in here is a table of basically lists all the consents you've given per vendor and per purposes. So the columns are the purposes that are in the IB framework today, and the lines are the vendors that are already registered, I think, as of yesterday. And so the idea is that this table represents the consents you've given as a user, and that's the same information we're sharing with vendors in real time on the page as per the IAB framework specification. So if as a user you wanted more information, either on the banner itself, by clicking on Learn More, or somewhere on the website in Privacy Policy or similar setting, you can get a more detailed basically list of those purposes and vendors. You can obviously go to each vendor, check them out. If you're interested in understanding in more details what they do, and you can decide for each purpose if you agree or disagree with the website and the vendors, basically realizing data processing on these purposes. And so if you basically change this, you'll see that it gets reflected in the table, and it also gets reflected in the data, in the consent information that we'll be sharing in real time with those vendors. What that means is that as a publisher, when you've deployed the banner, and the consent management tool is right here, if the user starts changing their preferences, that will automatically get pushed to all the vendors that are part of the framework. So it's solving one of the key issues in the industry, that is about sharing consent and making sure that once it's collected, it gets easily shared and used by third-party vendors. So we're iterating a lot on those, pop-ups and on finding the right way to give the user enough choices and enough granularity in the right setting. So we're testing a few other options of giving you more granularity, where you can choose by vendor and by purpose and things like that. So we'll be showing those a little later in the month. But the key idea is that we give more options to the user, and then we'll also take care of making sure that those choices really get reflected with the vendor's operations on the website. And so, that might get a little technical, but the key idea is that the CMP API is the IAB specification that defines how, as a CMP, we communicate with vendors. And so you can see that there are like functions on the page, and you can see basically what those functions do. So the type of information we give to vendors is something like that, where you can see for every vendor if they have consent or not, and for every purpose if they have consent or not. So that's the type of thing we're able to share in real time through what's called a consent string, which is a condensed or a very dense version of the table, technically. So that's the basis for the on-site experience we're providing, and for the way we plan to help publishers and advertisers getting compliance. I think I'm hearing someone. Maybe not. Okay. And so the way we think of this at Didomi is that you obviously and absolutely need to have this type of solutions deployed, but managing consent is a little more work than just collecting it and sharing it with vendors. Although that's pretty important and the hard part to do. What's also required is to be storing it and have an easy way to access it and be able to revoke consents given by users. As a DPO, for instance, you might have to do these type of things. And the way we look at it is also to say, when we're starting to deploy those banners and give those users more options, we need to think of it critically in terms of, does it actually serve the purpose of better informing the users and and really having them think about how, to some extent, we're monetizing yourself. So the way to think about it is to help our clients get a better experience of managing all these questions. So the way we integrate this is to say that there is the collection phase, that's all the on-site experience, and then there is the storage and analysis phase of those consents. And so what we're building there, and that goes hand in hand with the basically with the banner there, is to say that you need to be able to get statistics on the information that on the consents that you're collecting, the consent rate that you're achieving, and things like that, so that you can think about it critically. And there's also this idea that you want to be able to run, if not A/B testing, but maybe run different variants of things and see how they perform, and be able to think about it in a critical way. And then more importantly, what we'll also focus on is on giving you that user level views of those consents. So there is the audit trail. I don't know if it's zoomed enough, but there's the audit trail here for every single user that gives or denies consent on your website, where you can see what their actions were. So we're obviously cautious of only collecting the data that's required for basically giving you the proper information. But the idea is that we keep that audit trail for 13 months plus, usually 5 years, and so we keep it as first a way for you to prove that you actually collected the consent that you were supposed to do and that you're operating under that consent, and both kind of like to the regulator, but also to external vendors who could be asking questions about that. And then we also offer the option of revoking consent straight from the UI, where as a DPO, if you get a request from a user who wants to exercise the rights of revoking consent, you can do it from here. So the basic idea is to say that these things go hand in hand, where you have to be able to collect consent, but you also have to be able to manage it the proper way to stay in compliance with not just the collection part, but the auditability and integrity part of managing consent. And I think I'm right on time. So that was the gist of what I want to say. I hope this was useful. I'm happy to share more information or a demo link if anyone's interested. And I'm done here. Happy to answer any question if there is any.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Jawad. We've gotten a number of questions that are kind of general questions, and then a couple specific questions for you. So why don't we pause and take at least the questions for Didomi.
Sure.
So one question is, so the real-time sharing of the consent string with vendors happens through what mechanism? Pixel beacons for all third parties? Question mark.
So yes, the IB spec is about sharing the consent on the page. So you can do it through, so it's usually JavaScript polls on the page. And there's a JavaScript API that's exposed, that's available to frames through post message. We also support sharing that same consent information, so the consent string that's here, with image pixels, so non-JavaScript pixels, through tag managers or through direct embedding. So we can also pass that there. And then separately, that's not necessarily part of the IB spec, but we also work on being able to share that information through APIs and backends, so that we're able to have direct integrations with vendors where we can push that information to them through server-to-server integrations as needed. So the way we look at it is that our job is to just get the content out there to whatever vendor might need it. So we work on all these channels and making sure that it's easy to use.
Okay, I have another one. Will Didomi also block serving tags or only gathering and storing consent information?
So we can do both. We have both options of either just sharing the consent information and trusting all the vendors, which I think should be the default for all the IB vendors. But there is this option, if publishers want it, that they can actually block tags before consent is collected. I think that's useful as a transition thing, especially for cookies, where you want to make sure you're not setting cookies you shouldn't be setting. So blocking tags in that perspective is useful. I'm pretty confident that won't be necessary in the long term when all vendors have implemented the framework. that shouldn't be required, but we have that option as an intermediary measure.
Another question that may be sort of a policy interpretive question. So, but it'd be interesting to hear how you guys have thought about it. So for DDoMI's CMP, since it's not an overlay that forces a user to interact with it, if a user does not interact with the banner, is that considered consent or non-consent?
That's an extremely good question that I obviously forgot to address in my presentation. So thanks for asking. The way we operate today is similar to cookies banner as recommended by the CNIL, which is to say that clicking on the website, navigating on the website is a positive action. So if you click on the website, as in if you go to another page and that button simulates that, we basically close the banner and consider that is consent. So the banner does not absolutely require interaction, provided that you stay on the website and navigate on the website. We do not close the banner on scroll, which we think is a little excessive in terms of positive action. So we all need to navigation. But yes, the idea is that consent is collected when the user navigates on the website, as the wording basically explains it.
Yeah, it's great that you have that background with a really authoritative and pretty exigent DPA has informed your work. Okay, so now I'm going to pass along to Summer Simpson, Head of Product Management at Quantcast, and give Summer the floor and the screen. Hang on.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. We're trying to, yeah, there's your screen. Brilliant.
All right, excellent.
That's lovely. Blast off, Summer.
Thanks. All right, so Quantcast has been at this for quite some time. I think my life has pretty much become about GDPR, which is good. So we've done quite a bit of customer discovery. We're fortunate to have a number of publishers who are customers of Quantcast, so we're able to reach out to them in the UK and France and run things by them. Get feedback. We have about 12 publishers who are currently in our beta program and are testing out our CMP. Some of the things just to note before I jump in that kind of went into the early thinking and things that we wanted to make sure that were represented in our CMP. One was the ability for publishers to have third-party management. So not just the ability to kind of like control who's displayed in the CMP when consumers view it on a publisher site, but also the ability to have more control over who gets to set their cookies and fire their pixels on those pages, and the ability to communicate that out. The other second piece is a customizable UX, and we've learned we started out with a pretty simple UX, and then learned over time that there were a lot of different interpretations and a lot of publishers who have different levels of legal risk that they're willing to take, or different interpretations of the law, and we needed to be able to support that in the UX. So that led us to have quite a number of controls over the UX and how things were displayed to the consumer. The third piece was making sure that it was super easy to implement, even if publishers have tech teams who can code and build things themselves. We wanted to give people the option to not even have to think about that. Publishers have enough to deal with. This should be super easy to implement, as simple as taking some JavaScript code and setting some parameters and dropping into like a tag manager. The last piece, we wanted to make sure that what we were offering was free to publishers, and this is mainly driven towards getting the IAB framework adopted. We've taken a pretty agnostic position on CMPs. We'd love for people to use ours, but I think it's super important given where everybody sits in the ecosystem and how marketing dollars are spent across the ecosystem. that they didn't, have to have yet another thing to worry about to pay for. And getting the framework adopted is super important so that we can, continue this effort that we started with IAB Europe of all working together to continue to have that actually roll out in the industry and have everybody continue to work together and share the consent signal across the ecosystem. So let me here, I'll show you real quick, just to show. This is kind of where we started off. We took the Article 29 Working Group's opinion that was put out about GDPR and absolutely took that literally as a most conservative approach to a UX. What we've developed is it's obviously it's responsive, so it works on browsers, on desktop, mobile, and tablet, and it's fully customizable. So this is the one I'm going to show you first. Let me jump over. So this is a demo site that we have set up. I can share the URL so anybody can go and jump in and play with it. You can see that I've already been here playing around and setting consent for various vendors. If I wanted to change my mind at any point, we give publishers the ability to have a link or some other action on their page that allows people to update their preferences. And that may be working. There we go. So again, this is the most conservative view. We've been running experiments on News Now over the past month. This was the first version that we tested, and we've done quite a number of iterations on this, trying to understand how language that's presented to the user impacts consent rate, how the presence of branding impacts it. How choices are presented and various other things to kind of get a really, really good balance between making sure that we're being transparent and giving users the choice they need for the law and also not, impacting their experience too much and giving publishers the ability to make those choices. So again, this is the most conservative. It blocks the content. You can't close this modal. The buttons are presented equally as per the Article 29 opinion, and you are able to go down to the purpose level and see all the purposes that people want to track you for. Obviously, I've been here before and have set all of these. You can see the vendors that are asking to track a user under each one of these. And then you can save and exit, or if you're really, really interested, you can go down to the vendor list and see all the vendors that are tracking. Now, this is built right now against a temporary vendor list, and we're going to be updating. Well, it's already updated in our production code to read off the vendor list, so you'll be able to see the purposes here and get a link to the privacy policy, so that we're able to support users' right to data, so they can go direct to the vendors and ask for access to their data or ask to be forgotten. So this is the one version we've been testing. Another version that we tested on this was we made the do not accept button. We got rid of that, so it's I accept, and we changed the text of the link here to be view your options, and we're testing different language there. And then that again would take you to the purpose level, and people would be able to choose to not be opted into anything, or kind of pick and choose what they want to opt into. One of the other versions, and this test is actually running right now on News Now, we wanted to do a version that the UX was a little bit more familiar to users, so we went with kind of a cookie banner look and feel, so that it wasn't quite so disruptive to users. They can still see the content in the background, but because GDPR says that you have to have an unambiguous action on the part of the user in order to consider that to be consent. This does not go away until the user has actually made some sort of choice. So here again, you can accept all the cookies. You can click in to view your options, see all the purposes that are available, view the companies under those purposes, and then some quick links here, reject all, accept all, save and exit. And again, these are totally configurable by publishers. And then also, again, like the other version, go down and look at all the vendors that are available. And then I can accept all and save and exit. And again, this is a test right now, so normally that would just close. So that's pretty much it. We've had some interesting numbers that we've gotten on our tests. This first version, we were hitting about a 44% consent rate. And again, that's just on one site. I expect those numbers to fluctuate depending on the site that it appears on. Because one of the things that we found is that brand does have a lot to do with users' trust in how much consent they do give and the choices they make. The version where we did not have this button, we actually hit a 69.8% positive consent rate. And of course, that increased the number of people who were going in and looking at their purposes. But then once they got there, they understood what they were being asked for, and most of them just hit, accept all. A few went in and modified those settings. And then for the Banner version, I'm expecting that number to, just because of the familiarity of the experience, I'm expecting that those numbers will go up. But obviously, we're gonna test it like crazy because product managers say things like, "I expect the numbers to go up," and then they're proven wrong. So we'll be sharing that information publicly after all the tests are complete on our demo site. So that's it.
That's super. Thanks a lot, Summer. Again, let's take a couple of just very specific questions to Quantcast, and then move to the final demo and do the more general questions. So one question was, Summer, would you guys share so the Quantcast manager consentsu.org needs authentication. Will you share credentials with the IAB members?
Actually, yeah, I'll get those credentials removed. That shouldn't actually be there, but yeah, I'll make it available.
All right, that's lovely. And then there was a question about whether the I agree button provides a consent to all the vendors at once. And I guess the answer seemed to be that yes and no, because there's a ton of extra information in this layered way, but there is the option to agree to everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. So at this level, if somebody says I accept, they're accepting all the vendors that the publisher has chosen to be there. So if a publisher is like, you know what, I'm cool with the entire vendor list that's been vetted by the IAB, then that would accept all those vendors and set that globally. If they want to choose a subset with us, the publishers have the ability to either leverage a blacklist or a whitelist. So blacklist, they can say, I'll take everybody except this set, and a whitelist says, I only want these vendors. So there's tons of flexibility there. And then obviously at this level, when a user says, I accept, they're accepting to be tracked by just the vendors that have been configured to be allowed access.
Brilliant. Okay, one more question for Summer. Quantcast, how would you deal with an SAR as Didomi had a process for? SAR is. Does that make sense to you? Otherwise, we could leave that one to the end.
Yeah, we need an SAR definition.
It's a subject access request.
Sorry.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. So many acronyms. Yeah, so that's the right to data piece. So with that one, a user will be able to go in. Let's actually do it this way. Would go into the vendor list, and again, this is not the final version of the vendor list. When it's final, you will see the purposes listed here, and you will see a link that allows the user to go into the direct to the vendor and request access to their data, so a copy of their data, or request to be forgotten, which is considered a revocation of their consent, and also all of their deleted data has to be deleted. And we do it on a vendor by vendor basis because every vendor will have their own process. Like, for instance, for Quantcast, because we don't actually capture any real personal data. I mean, IP address and cookie are now considered personal data, but we don't collect email address, name, anything like that. So we don't have any way to identify a user other than the Quantcast cookie. So we need them to come to our form so we can look for that cookie and then find them in our system and know how to handle.
Super. Okay, we're going to stop there and go to the last demo of the day. Niels Baarsma, CPO and founder of Factor. Again, for a little 10-minute presentation, and then we'll take as many general questions as we have time for in the final 10, 12 minutes, 10, 15 minutes. Take it away, Niels.
Hi guys, I'm Niels Baarsma, Chief Product at Factor. So I will take you through a few slides just to give you some context in our interpretation of the CMP. So we started Factor a little under a year ago, really to try and focus on creating a fair value exchange between consumers, brands, and publishers. So what we're attempting to do is see if we can make the knife cut on both sides by giving consumers control and choice over their personal data, and provide publishers with tools to operate sustainable business models, and brands the ability to advertise more effectively. So we're actually launching a set of different products around the CMP. We're providing tools for publishers and site owners to scan their site for which vendors are present on their site. We provide a consent management tool aligned with the TCF to basically give users control over their data, and provide a tool to publishers. We call it a Factor ID, which allows an integration with their CM provider or login provider to make the consent less dependent on cookies, and an app marketplace where we really try to aim to give a user a choice. Do I want to share my data? Or perhaps there are tools like, say, Content Pass, where there is an additional business model possible for content consumption. So we initially, when we were building the consent manager, we had a whole different framework in mind. However, when late last year we heard about the TCF, it seemed like the way to go, and seemed as our responsibility to really focus on that framework and push it. So for the CMP, we have launched several different themes. So this is one example where we block the entire screen. It's a more conservative model. The one that I'll be demoing is actually a bar that is probably more familiar to users. It will cover about a third of the screen, and won't block the user from the content of the site, but will be persistent. Another feature of the Factor CMP is that we offer a small fingerprint on the left bottoms of the page that the user can click on to always have their consent preferences available. So we are independent because consent management is what we do. The UI is fully customizable, so the user can change all text and button colors and logos, etc. We provide an audit trail. The site owner can either do the host the audit trail themselves, or we do it for them. And the publisher is able to request either service-specific, global, or grouped consent. So let me just take you to our demo page. Sadly, our demo page is less fancy than the ones I've seen before in the previous presentations. This is the example of our top bar. So it's basically fully customizable. So all logos and buttons are subject to change by the site owner. So here you see the two-button approach. When you click on show me more information, then the bar expands. We present the user with more information. Actually, the site owner is able to dynamically add more pages in here. For instance, they can also host their cookie and privacy notice in here. The privacy settings, the user is able to basically control purposes or control by vendor. Here we only display the purposes and vendors that the publisher predefined. In case of global consent, the user can also manage that. And I think we are there. This so this interface also works on web and mobile web for our for the mobile app integration that we've sort of that we're currently already getting requests for. That is really something still up in the air, but we're actively working on some solutions there. So don't know if I still have time. Just to give you a small example. So when the user presses accept all, you will see here that the consent string is updated. And for the ad tech companies up there, they can simply call the consent status of the user, and it will be displayed here. So that's me for the presentation. Any questions?
That's lovely. Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Niels. So now I'm looking down through. I don't seem to see any specific questions for you. So now we could go through some of the general questions. A point that you touched on at the end. What is the what is the position? What is the roadmap for other implementations than cookie implementation? So we have the question: do any of these providers have a live solution for app? Does Matthias, do you want to speak to the issue of the implementation of the framework beyond cookies? I have a question: will the IAB consent framework be implemented in native mobile apps in the same way as for desktop web? So a few people have put the same question.
Hi, can you guys hear me? I'm sorry if there is a little bit of background noise. Can I first say that this was so cool to watch and see how people are thinking about implementing it. But to the question on whether it would be implemented in the exact same way on mobile, the answer is typical. Capabilities and in-app are different, so you don't have the availability of cookies, for example. But there's a tram. But the principle of it all would remain the same. You would store the information perhaps in local app storage instead. But then the concept remains largely the same. There is a mobile working group in the IAB Tech Lab at the moment that is specifically looking at that to perhaps provide a reference implementation there. But even in absence of that, CMPs can find possible implementations themselves for the mobile environment.
Thanks.
Hey, this is Joel.
Sorry.
Can I add something? So as part of Tech Lab, we're working on a specification for sharing consent in the mobile app. So it basically works the same way with a slightly different API. So there's this coming hopefully in the next few weeks that could be released, and then we'll basically be building the same type of UIs for mobile applications. And I think if you take a look at it from a more broadly approach, another big question that's ahead for CMPs the next months is about working on that from a different type of user ID perspectives. We're looking obviously on IDFAs, on user emails when publishers or advertisers have this type of relationship, so we can store the consent at a different level and not be that reliant on cookies or specifically temporary identifiers. So that's obviously something we're looking at, and then being able to share that with all the ecosystem, not just on the page or in the app, but also in the backend is also pretty important.
Great. Whoops. Bit of sounds like raining somewhere. Let me take some of the other general questions we got really right at the start of the call. What's the frequency of the global vendor list rollout? So right now we are updating it every day, and because obviously the sign up just started 10 days ago, and but I think we will get to the point where the updates will be once a week or something, probably not more. It won't be necessary to update it more often than that. A related question is what happens if a user has given his consent to all global vendors at a specific date, and a few weeks later, they're new vendors in the vendor list. The CMP has to ask again for the consent. So Matthias, I don't know if you could hear that and you want to take that one. I think the answer is yes, but I don't know.
I could hear that, and I'm sorry for the Billie Jean music in the background now, but so the answer is yes, you will have to reconsent, and that is basically up to the CMP on instruction of the publisher on how often they want to do that, and essentially whether to reconsent everyone or not to risk the existing consents and only surface the difference, that is the new vendors, or whether to just hold out and say, you know what, I don't want to bother the user again because I have a single new vendor. I will slowly get consent for that new vendor over time as I consent new users or old users consent lapses and I reconsent them.
Yeah, because a really important point is that it's the publisher who elects to work with certain partners, and the mere fact of changes in the total global vendor list, it'll give the publisher an opportunity to add another one if he so wishes. But an important principle of the whole framework is it's the publisher who decides which partners to work with, and nothing is determined by the composition or size of the global vendor list itself. There's another question: can we be in the global vendor list and be a CMP at the same time? Is that allowed according to the framework policy? That's absolutely allowed, and we have some companies that are doing both, such as Quantcast, for example. So absolutely, that is indeed possible. There was, let's see. There was an interesting question about the application of the framework to processors. That would be. I mean, Matthias, do you want to take on how the framework applies to processors? Since GDPR is mostly about data controllers, what's the processor angle for the framework?
Yeah. So if you are a processor, the relevance perhaps becomes less big because you yourself may not need to be, say, programmatically disclosed and obtain consent yourself. Instead, you would rely on the legal basis of your controller. Maybe you would be looking to the signal of a controller vendor in the list instead. But for the purposes of the e-privacy directive and storing and accessing information on a device, it is not clear at all that processors are exempted from the obligation of obtaining consent. So that a processor may want to participate in the framework plainly for the purpose of obtaining consent for the storing and accessing piece, while then relying on the legal basis for processing personal data of their respective controller.
Thanks a lot. That sounds a very comprehensive answer. There's a question, will the framework work reliably from the 25th of May? I think the answer is yes. And today's demos give us good grounds for conviction on that score. There's a question, is the format definition of the consent string standardized across all platforms? The answer is yes, and that's the heart of what the technical standard achieves. It's a standardized protocol for communicating that needs to be standardized and would work in needs to be the same in any implementation.
Yeah, I think it's important to add that even though we have standardized purposes, which is important for the signaling piece, if you have a signal that isn't defined, it is worthless. It doesn't mean that in the user interface, you couldn't also include purposes which are not standardized. You could just not rely on the framework to then transmit that to downstream partners. So a publisher, for example, that wanted to obtain consent for a purpose that it relies on but doesn't need or want to transmit down the supply chain could add a purpose that it relies on in the same UI.
Very good. I have a technical question perhaps for Summer. How does the string now get to my ad server? Still listening.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you fine. Thanks.
Yeah, so there's a number of ways. Well, I mean, the IB framework, the API itself enables this, and there's a few different ways. The main one is that whatever ad server is on a publisher site will pick up. There's a specific callback in the JavaScript for them. It'll pick up the consent string for that user, and then that information gets passed through an open RTB extension that TechLab updated and released a number of weeks ago. And then that gets passed along to everybody in the chain all the way up to the campaign. So all the vendors know if they have consent or not, and then know what they need to do. Another way for if someone is not in the RTB ecosystem, we can pass the consent information through a URL, and there is a updated version of the spec that covers that. And then I believe we're also supporting header bidding as well.
Super. Thanks very much. I had a question about whether the presentations will be available after the webinar. So ours will. I think I can say on behalf of all the speakers that these slides will be available. Guess you guys will confirm that. I've had some questions also about people who appear to have a couple questions from people who've tried to register and apparently not gotten sent an email to our registration email address and not gotten a reply. So that seems hard to believe because we have a very faithful and hardworking administrator at the other end of that email address sitting next to us here. But if anyone has any problems, please write to, we'll send some other email addresses around. We'll send some other email addresses around to everyone actually who signed up for this. I think we can write to everybody who signed up.
Yeah, so just to be clear, the sign up is a registration process on a website. So if you tried to sign up sending an email, that wasn't the right way to do it. So maybe that is the issue. But anyway, the register.consensu.org is where you get started.
Yeah, we did a little run through just of the CMP registration process at the beginning, but yeah, exactly. So, but we can recirculate those links. So I have a question. Is it required to store data subject consent in order to comply with the framework? Can you use an unidentifiable first cookie that's stored on the data subject's browser? Who wants to take that? Summer, maybe? Or Matthias?
Well, I can I guess take it. If the question, I will try and make sure I understand the question. The way I understand it is, can you just store the consent information without having an identifier associated to it? And I guess the answer is yes, you could. Although whether that would then be passed down and not combined with an identifier is questionable.
I think there's a proof question as well, where storing it server-side stuff, keeping that audit form, being able to prove that you actually collected the consent you're claiming when you need to.
Summer's explanation, her reference to the communicating of the signal has prompted a question. Could she elaborate some more on how it'll work with header bidding? Is that something you'd be able to say a bit more about, Summer?
Yeah, that one is beyond my technical skill currently, or actually it's not beyond technical skill. It's just I haven't dug down into the details of that with my engineers. But our lead engineer on our project is part of the Tech Lab working group on that, and they're working through that. Yeah, I can make sure that I get the information and forward that to you guys, and you can make it available.
That'd be lovely.
I can add one point here, which is a pre-bid JS has support for the CMP API now. I think they merged it a few days ago.
Here's another. Here's a sort of conceptual question. If CMPs are driven by vendors and publishers, who has primary authority over a user's global consent? So I don't know if the question is who has primary authority for recording and storing the information, communicating the information about a user's global consent.
The primary authority over consent is the user.
User, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, yeah.
Now, the CMP operates on instruction of the publisher, right? So, to the extent that a global choice is unacceptable, or a publisher would like to not rely on a global choice and revert to a site-specific choice instead, that would also be upon the publisher to determine
And Matthias, adding to that, the global cookie, the third-party cookie, that's stored in a third-party cookie. A publisher service level consent is stored in a first-party cookie on the publisher domain. And the way that we're approaching it, and I believe this is policy as well, is that if a user gives consent on a site that is depending on service level consent, and they also have a global third-party cookie because they've given consent on another site that relies on global level, that site's first-party service level cookie will override the global consent. So that's what gives the publishers the ability to control that and manage it.
Okay, we're running out of time. I had one final question. Somebody made the very reasonable observation that the GDPR is super hard to understand, and can anyone help with interpreting some of its very obscure language? And indeed, IB Europe has put out some guidance documents, white papers and guidance documents on the GDPR, and we have an ongoing effort, sort of a support group for companies trying to cope with it. And we can send also information about that work in follow-up to this webinar. So I think I just need to thank Factor, Didomi, and Quantcast for the presentations today. Thanks very much. Thanks to everybody who dialed in. We will have another, we'll do another next Friday's webinar devote to the same topic actually, and just get some more CMP demos, and that'll be another opportunity to answer questions that we weren't able to get to today, for which I apologize. But wish everyone a nice weekend and look forward to hearing you next Friday.